My Doberman has met a lot of foster dogs, but I've never seen her do this before. This tiny German Shepherd puppy decided she was his home. The problem was, she already had one. 3 weeks earlier, my phone rang on a hot afternoon in Denver, Colorado. The manager from a grocery store lot said, "There's a puppy that won't move. He's just sitting here. I think someone left him." I've heard that sentence more times than I wish I had, but something in her voice made me grab my keys faster than usual. When I pulled into the parking lot, I saw him immediately. He was pressed against the low curb near the cart corral, a 7-month-old German Shepherd puppy sitting so still he might as well have been bolted to the concrete. Carts rattled in and out beside him. Engines started, doors slammed. People walked around him in wide circles. He didn't flinch. He just stared past everyone. Eyes fixed on a point I couldn't see. There was no collar. His coat was dusty and sticky in places, but he wasn't skin and bones. This wasn't a street dog who'd grown up rough. This was somebody's dog until very recently. You could see it in the way he held himself, like he was waiting for orders that weren't coming. A couple of kids said they'd tried calling him and clapping. He never so much as turned his head. No growl, no bark, no attempt to crawl away when I got close. Fear usually runs or fights. This little guy didn't either. He looked like somebody had gone inside and quietly flipped his switch to off. I didn't reach for him right away. I laid a slip lead in a loose circle on the ground, far enough that he didn't have to step toward me. Then I sat down on the hot asphalt a few feet away, my back against the metal rail where people park their carts, and told him I wasn't in a hurry. Cars came and went. A breeze kicked a plastic bag across the lot. I talked about nothing in particular, the way you do when you're trying not to scare a child who's already had too much fear for one day. Every so often, his eyes would blink slowly, like it took effort to come back to the present for even a second. After what must have been close to an hour, he shifted his weight just enough that one paw slid into the loop of the leash. I tightened it carefully, waited for panic. None came. He didn't stand up, didn't try to bolt. He just sat there as if even the idea of taking a step was too much. So I did the only thing left. I got to my knees, slid my arms under his chest and back legs, and lifted. He hung there, frozen and silent in my arms, while I carried him across the shimmering pavement toward my car. By the time I laid him gently in the back, I knew one thing for sure. If this dog was ever going to move forward again, for a while I was going to have to do the walking for both of us. He didn't move once on the drive home. No crying, no scratching, no desperate pawing at the crate door. Just this heavy, unnatural silence in the rearview mirror. I've ridden with a lot of scared dogs, and usually you feel something from them. Panic, anger, confusion. With this little German Shepherd puppy, it felt like there was no one behind his eyes to send a signal. When we got to the house, I carried him in the same way I'd carried him off that parking lot. Arms under his chest and back legs, body stiff, but not fighting. I set him down on the kitchen floor, right in the patch of light that comes through the back door in the afternoon. He sat exactly where I left him, front paw lifted like he'd been frozen halfway through a step he never finished. Raya was the first to come meet him. My Doberman trotted in with that easy confidence she carries like a coat, then stopped 2 steps away from him, her ears tipped forward, her nose working, reading every line of his scent. No hackles, no growl, just a calm, "Who are you?" the way balanced dogs ask their questions. He gave her nothing back. Didn't lean away, didn't lean in, just sat there, paw raised, eyes tracking her in tiny movements while the rest of him stayed carved out of stone. I've seen frightened dogs squeeze themselves into corners or throw themselves at doors, but this one looked like a statue that hadn't decided whether it wanted to come to life. I crouched down beside the counter and really looked at him for the first time. On the side of his neck, under all the dust, was a faint patch of lighter fur, like someone had brushed him once with a streak of dawn and then walked away. Lumen, I heard myself say. A little bit of light. I told him it was just a temporary name, because I honestly didn't know if the world would ever get to see whatever was still flickering in there. Raya shifted her weight and stepped forward, slow and polite. She stretched her neck out and offered him a quiet nose touch, the gentlest invitation she had. For a long second, nothing happened. Then his nostrils flared, the softest inhale, as if the smell of another dog reached a place that voices and hands couldn't. It wasn't much, but as Raya circled once and walked past him, I noticed his body tilt a fraction of an inch in her direction, like some small part of him had started to follow her before the rest remembered it was supposed to stay frozen. Within a couple of days, it became painfully clear who Lumen thought the real rescue was. He didn't walk to his food bowl unless Raya went first. I'd set his dish down, the smell of warm kibble and chicken filling the room, and he'd just sit there, that one paw lifted, eyes flicking from the bowl to her. The second she stepped up and started eating, he would slide in beside her like a shadow and finally take a few bites. Take Raya out of the room, and the same food might as well have been rocks. Walks were no different. If I clipped the leash to his harness by itself and opened the back door, he froze in the doorway. A little German Shepherd puppy suddenly rooted to the tile. The world outside could have been lava for all he cared. But the minute Raya's leash clicked and she trotted past him, he'd unstick, tuck himself against her side, and follow so close he was practically wearing her. I booked a vet check, just to be sure I wasn't missing something physical. He lay on the exam table like a rag doll while the doctor checked every joint, watched him walk, listened to his heart. A few bruises, a little soreness, nothing that explained why he treated movement like a life or death decision. The vet glanced over the chart, then at me. "It's not his legs," she said quietly. "It's his heart and his head." Which, if I'm honest, I already knew. It's just different when someone says it out loud in a room that smells like disinfectant and peanut butter treats. Driving home, I kept thinking about a dog we had when my kids were young. Her name was Mabel, a beagle mix who would turn into a statue in the middle of the living room whenever voices got sharp. My wife and I thought we were being quiet with our arguments, but she always knew. She'd stand there, staring at nothing, holding her breath until we remembered she was in the room and found our way back to calm. Dogs feel the weather inside a house long before we do. Looking at Lumen now, pressed against Raya like she was the last solid thing in the universe, I could almost picture his old life. A bigger dog barking orders. Maybe a noisy yard with trucks and shouting and no safe corner. Somebody figured out that if he just locked up and waited, the chaos would eventually pass him by. By every training book on my shelf, I was supposed to teach him to stand on his own 4 paws, one careful step at a time. But the only time he even thought about moving was when Raya moved first. So one night, sitting on the floor with her head in my lap and his body pressed tight to her ribs, I made a decision. "All right, kid," I murmured, running my hand over her back and then his. "If she's the only bridge you trust right now, then she's going to be your bridge to the world. We'll fix the textbook later." So that's what we did. Our little pack turned into a moving puzzle piece. Me at one end of the leashes, Raya out front, and Lumen glued to her side like he'd been welded there. On our first real walk, he stuck so close he was literally stepping on her feet, toes tangled with hers every few strides. She shot me a look over her shoulder like, "Are you seeing this?" And I just shrugged. At first, Raya was annoyed. She's used to stretching out, covering ground with that easy Doberman stride, not dragging a 7-month-old German Shepherd puppy stuck to her hip. She huffed, tossed her head once, and tried to pull ahead. When she did, Lumen tried to go with her and tripped himself, claws scraping the sidewalk, panic flashing for a second in his eyes before he slammed back into statue mode. The next day, something changed. Instead of forging ahead, Raya slowed herself down. She shortened her stride, adjusted her pace until his little half-steps could keep up. When a car passed too close and he shrank into her, she angled her body just enough that he could tuck his head under her chest, using her like a moving wall between him and the world. Anytime a truck rattled by or a trash can banged, he pressed so hard into her that their shoulders moved as one. She didn't shake him off. She just breathed, steady and solid, until the noise faded and his muscles loosened by a fraction. I watched it happen again and again, his fear hitting her first instead of me, and her turning it into something he could survive. At home, it wasn't much different. In the evenings, Raya would pick a spot on the rug and flop down with a long sigh. A few beats later, Lumen would ease himself to the floor so close their ribs almost touched. If she got up to get water or follow me to the kitchen, he stood too, the hovering in the exact place she'd left, eyes locked on the doorway until she wandered back. Only then would he fold himself down again, like a camper who refused to sleep until the tent was staked. I knew it wasn't healthy, not long term. A dog shouldn't need another dog like an oxygen tank. But when I thought about the silent rock I'd carried off that parking lot in Denver, and then looked at this same dog now, choosing to walk, however awkwardly, beside another living, breathing creature, it felt like the kind of progress you don't argue with. One night I ended up on the floor with them, my back against the couch, tired in that way that gets into your bones. Raya came over first, of course, circling once before dropping down with her head on my thigh, her body stretched along the rug, a warm, solid line. Lumen lay parallel to her, pressed tight against her spine, eyes half open, watching. I didn't call him, didn't pat the ground or make kissing noises. I just sat there, scratching behind Raya's ears, breathing in the quiet. After a while, I felt a small shift. Lumen lifted his head, blinked, and then very carefully slid one paw forward. He inched his body along her side until his nose reached my knee. For the first time since I'd met him, he had moved toward me first, still anchored by her fur along his back, but choosing on his own to close that last little gap. It was only a few inches, but sitting there with his whiskers brushing my leg, I realized we had just crossed the first real bridge together. I had to know if he could stand without her. It felt wrong even thinking it, but there it was. A few weeks in, the vet called to remind me that Raya was due for her vaccines, and the more I looked at our little trio, the more I realized I couldn't keep pretending this 7-month-old German Shepherd puppy would be okay only as long as he was welded to her side. So one morning I clipped her leash, left Lumens hanging on the hook, and told myself it would be quick. 15, 20 minutes tops. Mira, my calm old lab mix, stayed behind on purpose. A soft heartbeat in the house so it wouldn't feel empty. Lumen watched from the hallway as Raya and I walked to the door. He didn't whine, didn't bark. He just stood there, ears tipped forward, that one front paw lifted like always. When the door closed between us, I heard his nails click once on the tile and then silence. Mira padded over to him, nose bumping his shoulder, doing her best. "You're not alone." Routine. For a while, he paced, I'm told. Back and forth from the door to the kitchen, sniffing every spot where Raya had been. The mat, the water bowl, the rug where she liked to stretch. It was like watching someone check every room in a house for a person they know is already gone. By the time I pulled back into the driveway and opened the front door, the house felt thick with quiet. Lumen wasn't at the entrance to greet us. He wasn't peeking around the corner. I found him in the middle of the kitchen, standing dead center on the tile, staring at nothing. Paw up, breath shallow, frozen so completely that even his tail looked like it had forgotten what it was for. He didn't run to Raya when she trotted in, didn't rush me like I'd seen other dogs do after a short absence. He just stayed there, like some part of him had shut down while we were gone and hadn't finished rebooting yet. It took a good minute before his eyes focused, before he lowered that paw and shuffled 3 uncertain steps closer to her, pressing his shoulder into hers like a man grabbing a railing after a dizzy spell. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. Whatever fragile connection he'd started to build with me, with this house, with the world, it all ran through another dog. Without a 4-legged anchor, I still wasn't enough to keep him from drifting. That night, after everyone had finally settled, I sat on the couch and watched a video I'd taken earlier in the week. Raya walking steady down the sidewalk, Lumen tucked so close against her side he might as well have been part of her, his head disappearing under her chest every time a car passed. On a whim, I posted the clip with a simple caption: "My Doberman has officially become housing for a rescue puppy who doesn't know how to be on his own." I figured a few friends would smile and move on. Instead, the little video started jumping from page to page, bouncing through dog groups and rescue forums. By the next morning, my notifications were full of strangers watching a Doberman carry the weight of one very shut-down puppy, and a few of them were already asking the same question I'd been afraid to think about. Could he ever fit in our home? I thought the clip would disappear in the usual scroll of cute dogs. It didn't. Over the next few days, my phone turned into a little earthquake. Rescue folks, trainers, people who'd lived with anxious dogs, everybody had an opinion about one very shut down German Shepherd puppy using my Doberman as a mobile home. Some comments were sweet, some thoughtful, some less kind. That's the internet. But one message stopped me cold. It was from a family in Phoenix, Arizona. They wrote that a few years back they'd adopted Doberman from a rescue down there, a big black and tan boy named Harper, who'd once been just as terrified as Lumen. It took them months, they said, to get him to walk past parked cars without shaking. Now he was the uncle to every foster dog that walked through their door. They'd watched the video of Raya and Lumen over and over. They saw the way he tucked himself under her chest when the world got loud. The way he refused to move his own feet until hers did. Then they wrote one sentence that I had to read twice. Maybe Harper can be Lumen's second anchor. I'll be honest with you. My first reaction was that this was insane. Another Doberman in the story? Another attachment? We were already bending the usual rules about clean breaks and single homes. The idea of building a life for this dog around not one but two big shepherd-shaped shadows sounded like trouble, no matter how kindly those shadows behaved. At the same time, I couldn't ignore the part of me that recognized the shape of what they were offering. A second safe dog. A second safe house. A chance for Lumen to learn that the world was bigger than one sidewalk, one kitchen, one Doberman. We'd already proven with Raya that sometimes the only way a dog like this can step forward is if another dog goes first. The family suggested something simple to start. They'd fly up to Denver for a long weekend. No promises, no paperwork yet, just time in my yard, walks around my block, 3 dogs, and a handful of humans, seeing if Lumen's heart had enough room to add another anchor point. When I said yes, we shared the plan under that same video. Almost immediately, the comments split. Some people cheered and called it beautiful. Others worried out loud about stress, travel, spoiling him with too many crutches. I read every word, sitting on the floor while Raya snored at my feet and Lumen breathed against her side, and I realized something important. Everyone was arguing about what kind of life would make sense for most dogs. But Lumen was never most dogs. And until he could feel safe in more than one place, the real question wasn't whether this plan was normal. It was whether we were brave enough to try something that wasn't. I knew they were dog people before I ever met their dog. They pulled up in a dusty SUV with nose prints on every window. 2 adults in their 40s climbed out first, moving with that calm, tired grace you only get from living a few years with anxious animals and anxious kids. Those kids tumbled out next, school age, not rushing the yard, not screaming, just looking around with wide eyes, taking it all in. Then Harper stepped out. Big, deep-chested Doberman, dark coat shining even under Denver dust, a few gray hairs starting to show on his muzzle. You could see the history on him if you knew what to look for. A little stiffness in the way he checked the driveway, a careful pause before he let himself relax. This was a dog who'd walked his own road from fear to something that looked a lot like peace. I brought Raya out first. Her ears went up the second she saw him. There's a way 2 good dogs look at each other that says more than any introduction I could give them. They circled, sniffed, traded a couple of polite snorts, and just like that, it was settled. Not rivals, not strangers. Colleagues. Lumen watched from the threshold, body half inside, half out. He'd seen a lot in the last few weeks, but another Doberman was a new chapter. When Harper turned his head toward the doorway, Lumen shrank back against Raya's shoulder, pressing so tight it was like he was trying to climb inside her skin. His eyes bounced between her and the newcomer, full of that silent question, "Are you home too?" Harper answered the only way that counted. He walked a slow arc away from the door and then lay down on the grass, long legs stretched out, chest flat against the ground. After a moment, he shuffled backward a little, giving Lumen a whole aisle of space between them. No staring, no pressure. Just a big, steady dog making himself smaller. Raya, sensing the shift, took a few unhurried steps into the yard. Lumen followed, glued to her hip at first, ribs brushing her side with every breath. When she stopped, he stopped. When she angled toward Harper, his whole body leaned, but his feet hesitated, like the rest of him hadn't gotten the memo. Harper eased into a slow playbow, front end low, rear high, tail giving the softest wag. Not the wild, bouncy kind you see in dog parks. A quiet question. And if you want. Lumen didn't bolt. He didn't turn to stone either. Instead, for the first time since I'd brought him home, he started tracing small circles on his own. He drifted away from Raya's side by a step or two, then curved back, then edged toward Harper, then away again. 3 adult dogs in my yard, and this scared German Shepherd puppy was orbiting between them, not freezing, not collapsing, just moving. By late afternoon, he was worn out in that good, heavy way. We all ended up in the grass as the sun slid down, kids drawing chalk patterns on the patio, adults talking softly, dogs scattered like dropped commas. Lumen finally chose his spot. He lay down between Raya and Harper, head resting across Harper's front paw, tail barely touching Raya's hind leg, as if he couldn't quite bear to lose contact with either one. The mom caught my eye and smiled, that kind of smile that has a little fear tucked into the corners. "We'd like to take him," she said, "but only if you and Raya stay in his life for a while. He's building a bridge here, and we don't want it to collapse the minute he crosses it." Standing there looking at 3 dogs lined up like that, past, present, and possibility, I realized they weren't just offering him a home. They were offering to share him, and that was a different kind of love altogether. I wish I could tell you I said yes right away. The truth is, standing there with 3 dogs stretched out in the grass and that family looking at me with so much hope, my first thought was, here we go again. Another dog with 2 homes, 2 sets of people rearranging their lives around one nervous heartbeat. I could already hear the comments in my head. Why can't he just let dogs go like normal rescues do? Why is everything always so complicated with him? I'd done it once with Elodie. 2 houses, 2 routines, 1 scared dog learning that the world doesn't end at a single front door. It worked. But it left a mark on me I still felt every time my phone buzzed with an update from her new life. Now here I was, being asked to build another bridge instead of a clean, simple road. That night, after the family went back to their hotel, I called Nolan. He knows my rescue brain better than most. "I'm afraid I'm creating dogs that can't live without me," I admitted, tracing circles on the kitchen table with one finger while Raya snored under my chair and Lumen kept watch from the doorway. There was a pause on the line. Then his voice, quiet and maddeningly reasonable. "No," he said. "You're creating dogs that couldn't live at all without someone doing things differently. There's a big difference." We talked logistics until it started to sound less like desperation and more like a plan. For the first few months, Lumen would live primarily in Phoenix with Harper and the family. Raya and I would fly down and stay for a week at a time, so the first big transition wasn't a straight cut. After that, they'd bring him back to Denver sometimes. We wanted the car to stop being a haunted tunnel and start being a shuttle between safe places and familiar faces. It still felt messy. It still felt like the kind of thing that would make some people roll their eyes. But when I looked at Lumen, at the way he tucked himself between Raya and Harper, as if he'd found the doorway he'd been waiting for on that parking lot curb, I knew normal was never going to be the right word for him anyway. The night before their flight home, I was sitting on the living room floor going over flight details on my phone. Raya had already wandered off to my bedroom, claiming her usual spot on the rug. I felt a soft weight brush against my leg, and when I looked up, Lumen was there. No Doberman between us, no other dog to hide behind. He eased in close, lowered his head, and laid it right across my knees. For a long moment, he just breathed, eyes half closed, not searching the room for Raya, not listening for anyone else's footsteps. It was just him and me and the quiet. And that was when I realized he wasn't only learning to share his heart between 2 homes. He was finally starting to stake a little claim in mine. And the morning we left, the air in the house felt heavier than usual. We'd gone back and forth on how to get him to Phoenix. In the end, we decided he shouldn't start his new life by being shoved into a metal tube in the sky. The family would drive home, and I'd follow behind them in my own SUV with one very sensitive German Shepherd puppy and a trunk full of hope. I opened the back hatch and spread out 2 familiar anchors. On one side, Raya's old blanket, worn in all the right places, smelling like our Colorado kitchen and 100 quiet nights on the floor. On the other, a new fleece throw the family had brought, already soaked in Harper's scent. 2 beacons pointing in the same direction. Then I stepped back and waited. No coaxing, no lifting. If he was going, it had to start with his own feet. Lumen stood at the edge of the driveway, eyes flicking from the car to me, then to the family loading their bags. For a second, I thought we'd reached the limit of what he could do. Then he took a breath I could hear from where I was, walked up to the open hatch and climbed in. He turned once, tucked himself so his shoulder brushed Raya's blanket and his nose rested on Harper's and looked up at me like, "All right, I'm here. You do the driving." When the engine started, I watched his body tense out of habit. His ears tipped back, his head lifted, and I saw that old familiar question, "What now?" But he didn't lock up. He looked at me in the mirror, searching my face, then lowered his head again. The fear was still there, but the full-body freeze never came. On the highway, he moved between worlds. Sometimes he sat up and watched the landscape scroll by. Fences, fields, big sky, nose working, trying to file away this new chapter. Other times he buried his face in the fold between the 2 blankets, eyes shut, breathing in the smells of both of his homes until his shoulders loosened. Step forward, step back, the way all healing really goes if we're honest about it. When we finally pulled into the family's neighborhood in Phoenix, the sun was lower and my nerves were higher. They parked in front of a 1-story house with a wide yard and a front porch that looked like it had seen a lot of evenings. Harper came out first, trotting down the walkway with his tail waving in an easy, "You made it" arc. He didn't crowd the car, didn't bark. He just waited near the bumper, giving Lumen a familiar face to land on. The kids sat on the porch steps, hands in their laps like we'd practiced, letting him set the pace. No squealing, no running toward him with outstretched arms. They'd learned patience from their own scared dog, and they used every bit of it now. I opened the hatch. Lumen hesitated, then jumped down on his own, landing a little stiff but upright. He scanned the street, the yard, Harper, the kids, and started to angle his body toward the front door. That's when the universe decided to throw us one more test. Somewhere down the block, a diesel truck fired up, chains on the back rattling against metal. The sound rolled over the houses like a memory with teeth. I saw Lumen's whole body flinch. For a heartbeat, he froze in that awful familiar way. Paw half lifted, eyes glassy, everything in him screaming to disappear. Before I could move, Harper stepped forward. He calmly put himself between Lumen and the street, broad chest facing the noise, head turning just enough to bump Lumen's muzzle with his own. No drama, no big correction, just this quiet, solid here. Look at me instead. And then something I'd never seen happened. Instead of collapsing in place or trying to fold into the ground, Lumen blinked, shook out once from shoulders to tail, and took a step. Not back toward the car, not sideways into nowhere, but forward toward the open front door of his new home. Standing there on that Arizona lawn with chains clanking in the distance and 2 Dobermans flanking one small, terrified heart, I realized that for the first time the sound that used to mean danger had pushed him in the direction of safety. The days that followed felt like borrowed time. We slipped into a strange little rhythm in that Phoenix house. Mornings on the patio with coffee and dogs sprawled under the table. Short walks around the block where Raya and Harper took turns being the front dog, while Lumen switched sides like he was trying on different versions of himself. He learned where the water bowl always sat, where the good patch of shade lived at noon, which floorboard creaked outside the kids' room. He also learned where I slept. More than once I woke up in the guest room to find him standing in the doorway, just watching, like he was checking that the Colorado part of his world hadn't vanished in the night. He'd give one quiet sniff, then pad back down the hall to curl up beside Harper. Half here, half there. On the 4th morning, it was time. My bag sat by the front door, the desert air already warming up. Raya hopped into the back of my SUV without drama, settling in beside the same old blanket that had carried her through so many goodbyes. The family gathered on the lawn, kids trying very hard not to cry, Harper pressed against their legs like a living sandbag. Lumen stood in the grass between the car and the front steps. You could almost see the tug of war happening inside him. One paw angled toward the open hatch, toward Raya, and the life that had pulled him out of that parking lot. The other turned toward the door of the house where his new smells lived, his new routine, his new people. I walked over and dropped into a crouch so we were eye to eye. "Buddy," I told him, voice not nearly as steady as I wanted it to be, "this one's on you. You get to choose where your feet go." He came to me first. He always did. He lowered his head and sniffed my hands for a long time, tracing every line of old scars and new calluses, the way dogs memorize the map of the people they love. Then he leaned his chest into me, hard enough to rock me back on my heels, and gave my fingers 3 fast, nervous licks. The first kisses he'd ever offered me. And then he turned. He didn't bolt or stumble. He just pivoted, gathered himself, and ran straight for the porch, straight for the kids who were holding their breath on the steps. He slid to a stop between them, looked back once at me and Raya, and then sat down with his body facing the house, not the car. No hiding behind Harper, no folding himself under Raya, just one scared dog choosing with his whole body to belong to a place instead of a getaway plan. Watching him there, framed by that little front porch in the desert, I felt something split and settle inside me at the same time. I have never in my life felt so much hurt and so much relief in one heartbeat. A few months later, I started getting proof that we hadn't broken him by making his life weird. My phone filled up with little movies from Phoenix. Lumen tearing around the backyard with Harper, Paws kicking up dust, ears finally learning how to flap instead of pinning back in fear. In one clip, a trash truck rattled down the street. He stopped mid-run, looked up, and my gut clenched out of old habit. But instead of turning to stone, he sprinted straight to Harper, pressed his side against that big Doberman, and then trotted over to the kids like, "Did you hear that too?" He didn't pretend the world was quiet now. He just stopped facing it alone. When Raya and I finally made the trip down again, it felt like walking into a story that had kept going without us in the best possible way. We barely made it out of the car before the front door flew open. 3 dogs came pouring across the yard. Harper in the lead, Lumen right behind him, Raya recognizing her old friend and launching into the pack. No hesitation, no careful inching this time. Just a scrappy little parade of muscle and tails. Lumen didn't latch onto me like a drowning swimmer grabbing a life raft. He ran up, bounced off my chest with both front paws, gave my chin one quick lick, and then spun back to bump shoulders with the kids. That's when I knew I hadn't left a hole in him by driving away. I'd left room. Later, in the kitchen, I saw a picture I wish I could mail back in time to the man who picked up a frozen puppy off that Denver parking lot. Harper lay stretched out along one wall, eyes half closed, the anchor he'd grown into. Lumen sat a few feet away, one front paw lifted in that same old pose that used to mean I'm about to shut down. Only this time, there was nothing hard or glassy in his face. His eyes were soft, mouth loose, head tilted toward the smell of dinner. The raised paw wasn't a panic button anymore. It was an invitation, a little, "Hey, what's next?" He moved through that house like he belonged there. He'd pad over to me, lean his shoulder into my leg for a minute, then wander back to the kids to nudge a toy their way. If a car door slammed outside, he'd pause, check in with Harper or glance at the adults, and then get back to whatever he was doing. He wasn't glued to any one of us now. He floated easily between all of his people, like a dog whose world had finally grown big enough to hold him. Watching him weave between 2 Dobermans and 2 sets of humans, it hit me. The happy ending here wasn't that he turned into some perfect, unflappable, normal dog. It was that an anxious German Shepherd puppy had managed to pull 2 families and 2 rescue Dobermans into the same orbit. And all of us had quietly agreed to bend our lives around the way his heart worked, instead of forcing him to bend around ours. By the end of that visit, I found myself on the rug in their living room, right in the middle of the life we'd all built around one complicated dog. Harper was stretched out on my left, long Doberman legs kicked sideways, his head resting against my hip like he'd known me forever. Lumen was on my right, pressed close enough that I could feel each slow breath move through his ribs. The kids were on the floor a few feet away, drawing dogs that looked suspiciously like the 3 lying next to me. I want to talk to you for a second about dogs who don't run. Everybody loves the videos where the puppy sprints into open arms on day 1. But some dogs don't sprint. Some dogs freeze. They stand in parking lots and kitchens and vet offices with one paw lifted and their whole body saying, "If I move, something bad might happen again." For dogs like that, going forward isn't instinct, it's homework. It's a whole science. Every step is a lesson. Every meal, every car ride, every new room has to be relearned with someone standing quietly beside them saying, "You're safe. Try again." I used to believe the kindest thing we could do for a dog was give them one clear home, one set of people, one simple story. I thought anything else was too messy, too hard, too much. Now I'm sitting on this floor between a German Shepherd puppy, two Dobermans, and two families who decided that if his heart needed a network instead of a straight line, then a network is what they were going to become. That's what I want you to hear in Lumen's story. Not that he turned into some picture-perfect, fearless dog, but that sometimes the dogs who scare us a little with how fragile they are, the quiet, inconvenient ones, are the ones who pull the very best out of us. They make us softer. They make us more patient. They make us build bridges we didn't know we were capable of. This is where you come in. I don't ask you for much on this channel, but if Lumen made you feel anything at all, I'm going to ask you for something now. Leave a like, write a comment, share his story with someone who loves dogs. When you do that, you're not just helping Brave Paws, you're helping the next frozen puppy on a parking lot curb get noticed, get pulled into a car, get a chance at a strange, beautiful, too complicated happy ending. Later that night, before we drove back to Denver, Lumen walked over to me on his own. He turned once in a slow circle and then curled up right between me and the front door, his back brushing my leg, his nose pointed toward the hallway where his family slept. Harper and Raya settled on either side of him like two long shadows, the dogs who had taught him how to move his feet again. And for the first time since I met him, he fell asleep guarding the space between where he'd come from and where he was going, instead of being trapped in the middle. Thank you for watching and for caring about dogs like him. Your support is the reason we can keep showing up for the ones everyone else thinks are too much. If you can, stay with us for one more story. There's always another quiet nose waiting at the edge of someone's world.